for dedicating an hour of your lives to me when, there's much better stuff on Netflix, which is about an hour long. But thank you anyway. Let's go straight into my PowerPoint. Guide us through. So yeah, very brief introduction. I think most people in this room know me already. So yeah, I'm Henry Troy. I work at NUFS. And relevant to this presentation, I'm an Ielts examiner. I used to be an ACEN rater for speaking and for writing, and I used to teach Cambridge tests. So all of that brings me closer to the topic of today's presentation and workshop, which is adapting classroom activities to prepare students for English language tests. It is a workshop, but first you'll have to listen to me a bit, I'm afraid. So yeah, a little bit of introduction. Then we'll focus on 4 key tests, English language tests. After that, I'm going to sort of compare what maybe we cover already, especially in university education, and things perhaps we don't cover. And then a couple of activities, the more interactive part of the presentation. So parts 4 and 5, there are 2 ideas that perhaps you could use in your lessons to help students prepare for English language tests. A few other tips and stuff to finish, as well as potential drawbacks. There may or may not be time for questions. Okay, so why is it important for us to know about these tests? Most of these are obvious. You'll already be aware of these, but students often need to take these tests for important reasons, such as especially for studying abroad, sometimes for living abroad. In terms of their job, a certain score can benefit their career, especially if they want to be an English teacher, but not only for that. Lots of jobs in Japan, you can get a bit more money if you have a certain Toeic score or ACEN score. Not to mention if they want to work abroad as well, of course, it's going to be vital then. Another point is that test-taking ability and communicative ability are different things, connected but different. I'm sure we've all had students who have strangely high Toeic scores, and yet they're not very good at communicating. And that's just an easy example of where just because you're a good speaker doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a good score on an English language test. Another point that's important is the tests are different. Depends which test they're taking, what skills they might need. And the last one, I think it's our duty as teachers to be informed. I'm sure we've all had students ask us or tell us that they're taking a certain test and asking for some advice. And we might bat them off to another teacher who's more of an expert, which is a good thing if you have a teacher who is an expert on a particular test. But I think it's also a sort of responsibility to have at least a basic knowledge of the key tests our students need to take. So what are the most popular or important tests in Japan and the world? First, I've got these international standardized tests. So these are the big ones internationally. You have Ielts, Toefl, the various Cambridge tests, ITEP, PTE, which is Pearson, and Trinity College. There are a few more as well, but when I look at what universities require, these ones are often listed. And then the Japan-centered tests. Toeic is technically an international test, but as I'll explain more later, it's very Japan-centered, and ACEN is completely Japan-centered. Today, we're going to focus on these 4 that I've circled in red, Ielts, Toefl, Toeic, and ACEN. I feel they are the most relevant to our students. We do have students taking some of the other ones. It absolutely happens, especially Cambridge. But these are the four we're going to focus on today. So let's start with Ielts. This is supposed to be a general overview of each test rather than a comprehensive explanation. So Ielts stands for International English Language Testing System. It claims 3.5 million or more annual test takers pre-corona. All of these figures are pre-corona, so we're not really sure now. Yeah, it's recognized by most, I'd say, universities, a lot of different countries in terms of visa stuff as well, companies. It's commonly recognized. There are two versions. There's the academic version and the general version. I would estimate 90% of people take the academic version, and there's a high chance that your students will only be interested in the academic version. 4 sections: listening, reading, writing, and speaking, in that order, and the test takes about 3 hours in total. The speaking is done face-to-face with a real human, and it's sort of an interview discussion style. So question, answer, and towards the end, it gets a little bit more discussion based, but it's still really an interview, basically. People associate Ielts with the UK and Australia, but it does include some American, Canadian voices or English as well. So it is, I would say, slightly more British and Australian stuff, and they're the ones that run it. But absolutely, I mean, I'm an Ielts examiner, and some of the examiners are American or Canadian or Irish, for example. Scores range from 1 to 9. 1 is you punch the examiner or something. It's almost impossible to get a 1. And 9 is Ielts examiner level. We differentiate it from native speaker level because actually native speakers might not necessarily get a 9. But 9 means you are good enough to be an examiner. It's generally paper-based still, but it's trying to digitalize, and I believe that from this year an online version is coming, and you can already take a computer-based version in a few places like Tokyo. And the current cost is a hefty 25,000 yen, so it ain't cheap. Next up, we have Toefl. It's Ielts' primary rival. Toefl has a few test takers than Ielts, but it's probably more popular in Japan. And places like NUFS place emphasis on Toefl. Similar to Ielts, it is commonly recognized around the world by universities, governments, etc. The two main versions are IBT, the internet-based test, and the paper-based test. Most people take the IBT. Same as Ielts, it has 4 sections, and same as Ielts, it takes about 3 hours. It used to be longer, but they reduced it probably due to feedback that it was too long. Unlike Ielts, it is mostly done via a computer, and the speaking is task-based. Basically, you're given a task like you have 40 seconds to prepare to talk about this topic or to answer this question. A little bit different from Ielts, which is more interview style. It predominantly uses North American English. I've written American English. It claims it doesn't just do that, but it is predominantly North American English. It is centered in New Jersey, I think, the company that runs them. And scores range from 0 to 120 for the internet-based test, and the bizarre 677 is the top score of the paper-based test. It is very expensive. It's about 28,000 yen. Moving on to Toeic. I'm sure you're all aware of Toeic. So more than 3 million annual test takers. It is recognized a lot of places, even internationally, but it's most prevalent in Japan and South Korea. There are two versions, the listening and reading test, which takes about 2 hours, and the speaking and writing test, which was more recently introduced. But the vast majority of people take the listening and reading test. All questions are multiple choice. You just mark A or B or C or D. The speaking is done via a computer if you take the speaking and writing version, a little bit like Toefl, but some interview style as well. So it's kind of a Toefl Ielts mix. And it uses a mix of different English for the listening, but again, slightly more American English. Scores range from 0 to 990, and the test is a bit cheaper, although the price has gone up recently. Finally, ACAN or STEP ACAN, the ACAN test in practical English proficiency. Again, 2.3 million plus annual test takers. It is less recognized than the other tests because it's mostly just in Japan. Also, it tends to be taken by young people, especially children and teenagers. Adults do take it, but it tends to be adults who want to be or are English teachers or need it for their work for some reason. It's called STEP because there are 7 steps, or kind of 5 steps from 5 to 1, but 2 of the steps, step 2 and step 1, have pre-1 and pre-2. Questions vary, but yeah, they all have reading, listening, and speaking. Writing is not so much in the test until level pre-2. Then they have to start writing an actual small short essay. Mostly uses North American English. Unlike the other 3 tests, it is a pass-fail format. So you get through to the next grade, or if it's the top one, you complete number 1, or you fail. And the cost really varies depending on the age or level of the candidate. So 900 yen is for very young people taking level 5. And if you're taking step 1, ACAN 1, and you're an adult, then you're going to pay closer to this top fee. And the middle levels will be somewhere in the middle. Okay, we got through the 4 overviews. Just to give you an idea of the scoring, and I think this is a really useful table that it's the type of table that I want to keep on hand when students tell you their scores in different tests and things like this. So across the CEFR, Common European Framework of References for Languages, this is where the different scores lie. So having this kind of table is very useful. On the other hand, as I said, they don't always translate very well, especially, as I said, Toeic. So if someone has a 940 on Toeic, they might only have a 5.5 in Ielts. So that middling score in Ielts could be one of the top scores in Toeic. So they don't translate beautifully, but it is a useful reference point, I think. Okay, now I'm going to generalize a bit, so please forgive me. Some of these things will not be true of you or not be true of everyone, but I'm just going to sort of generalize a little bit of the type of things we usually cover, which might also be in tests. So we do recorded listenings, comprehension questions, discussion questions. These things are very common in university classes especially, but not only university classes. There's a tendency to focus on casual conversations. So we want our students to converse, focus on fluency, and sorry, that was for speaking. I mean, the listenings tend to be more casual conversations. And yeah, usually we let students listen many times, 3, 4, 5 times. Similarly with the reading, we do in-class comprehension and discussion questions. Often reading is done for homework, and then some discussion or comprehension questions are done in class. And there's also intensive reading. Many universities have this type of class, but it tends to be a comprehensive covering of a reading. So a reading is not just quickly gone through, it's really analyzed, gone through in depth. Looking at writing and speaking, essays tend to be done over several drafts. For example, writing classes I do, typically first draft, peer review, second draft, teacher review, final draft, right? They get feedback from their fellow students and teachers, a teacher, and the goal is kind of to make a great final product. That's common. As for speaking, we often do pair and group work. There's a lot of emphasis on a communicative approach. Speaking assessment is very varied. I recommend watching or reading Jason Walters's stuff on that. He's looking at speaking assessment. There's no real one way that university teachers assess speaking. And presentations are very common way of assessing speaking. Okay, so now I'm going to generalize again, but these are the things that I think don't tend to be covered, but are still important in language tests. The first is listening, and I think there's an underrepresentation of more formal or academic listenings, for example, lectures. As I said, we tend to allow our students to have several times to listen. So there's a lack of just allowing them once or twice to listen to something, to limiting it. Exposure to distractors. Tests are renowned for having distractors like answers to mislead. They are perhaps slightly lacking from listenings we might use in our regular classes. And another thing is that listenings tend to get progressively more difficult in a test. That doesn't necessarily happen in our courses. Reading, we rarely give students a time limit. I mean, we might say by next lesson, but we don't actually time them reading usually. Strategies, some people will strongly disagree. I know some of you will use and teach reading strategies, but it's not universal. And again, we don't tend to give them progressively more difficult readings, except over perhaps years, that their second year readings might be more difficult than their first. Writing, rarely do we give students a time limit for writing. I know that some teachers do, and sometimes I do, but it's not common, and it's not usually assessed. The assessed work tends to be these final drafts. We might give word limits, but a minimum word limit, which is what tests often have, is not that common. And we usually want them to include references and citations, which is not something that's required in tests. As for speaking, interview style, sometimes we do, but usually it's group or pair work. Similarly, task style is actually quite rare as well. It's mostly discussion style. And again, we rarely give them progressively more difficult speaking activities. These are big generalizations, and these will not all be true for you, but these are the type of things that perhaps there's a gap with. So, having survived my presentation part, let's move on to the active part. My proposed solution is that we make the student the examiner. This is a way that can help students become more aware of test-taking procedures without it becoming too mundane, boring. So here are some reasons. It makes them familiar with how tests are scored. If they learn to score themselves or others. And yes, they can self-assess, they can assess other people who are not in the class via videos you make, or they can assess peer review other students. And I know, again, a lot of you will already do this. You already have self-assessed tasks and peer-assessed tasks. The difference here is it would be standardized, as in they would actually be giving scores, and you'd have more than one assessment of the same person. And then you would say, okay, you gave them this score and you gave them this score. Why did you give them differently? And try and standardize what you think someone's level is in whatever discipline they're doing. So we're going to try an activity now. This is our first activity. We are going to watch a video of a woman speaking, taking a part 3, which is the last part of an Ielts speaking test. Oh, sorry, before we do that, some advantages of doing this in the speaking activity. Yes, so it gives students a chance to experience test-like conditions. They may not usually have these in the class. Maybe they do, maybe not, but yeah, so as I just said, it helps them to assess speaking level. It can be flexible. It could be holistic, where you just sort of go overall, how did this person do? What were their overall strengths? What their overall weaknesses? Or it could be very specific, where you look at their vocabulary and say, which good words did they use? What grammatical structures did they use? So it can, you know, how holistic or specific you make it is up to you. And it can help with listening, because they have to listen very carefully to the person speaking. So now we're going to try it. We're going to use Ielts style this time. So you are going to be examiners. On an Ielts scale, you have 1 to 9. As I said, 1 is an attempted assassination of the examiner, and 9 is Ielts examiner level. As I said, we have to distinguish native speaker from a level 9, because you might have a native speaker who just doesn't talk much during the test. They shouldn't get a 9 automatically because they sound okay, that you have to prove your ability. And of course, everything in the middle, right? So without giving you much training or any training of how to do this, I want you to score this woman. There are 4 categories that are scored in Ielts speaking. Each is worth an equal percentage, so each is 25%. Fluency and coherence. Lexical resource means vocabulary. Grammatical range and accuracy. And pronunciation. I'm not going to go into detail about exactly what each cover, because we don't have time. But let's give this a go. Okay, so what I recommend you do is you might take a piece of paper, quick note, write fluency or vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation. And for each category, give her a score from 1 to 9, and then average them out to get an overall score. When you get the overall score, it has to be 0.0 or 0.5. So for example, if it was 6655, it would be 5.5. Okay. I'm very interested to see what score you give this lady. So I'm going to ask Jane just to turn on her mic, just to verify that the video is going to work okay. Hello, Jane.
Hello.
Hey. Yeah, I just need you to tell me that you guys can hear it. So I'll just press play and just let me know if you can. Just give my computer a moment.
We've been talking about a well-known person.
Can you hear that and see that okay? Jane?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Okay, here we go. So it's a 5-minute video. Please watch and assess.
you like or admire, and I'd like to discuss with you one or two more general questions related to this. Let's consider first of all famous people in your country. So in Malaysia, what kind of people become famous?
In Malaysia, definitely the politicians, and also some actors and actresses are very famous among Malaysians.
So what about in the past? Is that the same as in the past? Were politicians and actors and actresses always?
I think definitely in the past, if you're talking about the 50s and 60s, movies were the number one communication tool between villages or towns. So the people definitely knew actors and actresses better than the politicians. Compared to now, you have TV and news where people follow politicians' personal life more than an actor or actress.
Because in many cultures, quite the opposite has happened, where politicians used to be quite well known, whereas nowadays movie stars, television stars are more well known. What do you think about in the future? Do you think that that's going to continue? Politicians will continue to be?
I think definitely in the future, because the world is becoming more globalized, Malaysians would have a tendency to be exposed to more international programs, and they know more international celebrities compared to the local actors and actresses or local politicians. So we would follow international politics, maybe American or British politics, or even the models or actresses internationally.
Well, let's talk about celebrity culture. Often famous people are used in advertisements. Can you give me some examples of that?
Yeah, famous people like actors and actresses are used in advertisements, and especially sports celebrities like Tiger Woods or Roger Federer, promoting sports equipment or sports shoes or clothes. Other than that, I think it's more models and actresses that sponsor perfume and clothes. And
is that always true, that whatever profession they're involved in, that's the kind of product that they tend to promote?
I don't think that's true, because a lot of celebrity actresses support perfumes and support clothes whereby actually it should be models that do it.
But isn't that sort of glamorous kind of side of Hollywood that they can try to bring to the public?
I suppose that's what they're trying to do. The marketing, the people who are marketing the product are trying to bring in the glamour that that celebrity holds. But yeah, I suppose a celebrity they do have that grasp over, people's mindset and what they should buy, the consumerism.
Now you're talking about their influence
Yes.
on the consumer. What about on the young? Do celebrities, do you think, produce negative effects in our youth?
Definitely, I think they do. As you can see, like lifestyle and health, celebrities are becoming thinner, models and celebrities. And when you open a magazine, young girls would be exposed to thin models, and they think that that's normal for them to be thin, and that could cause them to go into anorexia, bulimia, or unhealthy practices, because they think being thin is a norm, whereas being healthy and being normal-bodied is actually the norm.
Now, what about young boys? Do you think that celebrities can have an influence on young boys?
I think most definitely. I think young boys could be influenced in a way materialistically, like they would want the big car that the celebrities drive, and they want the bling, and they want all the cool gadgets and tools that there are out there, and it could make boys realize that materialistic things are the only way to happiness.
Now, what about public opinion? How might celebrities be used to influence public opinion?
Celebrities are used actually to, like, if you can see PETA, the protection of the endangered animals, they use celebrities to get to the public. There's like this promotion where they get celebrities to go naked to show that animals are stripped, especially like seals and foxes and all that, for their fur. And, it strikes a chord because it's a celebrity. Oh, that person's doing that. Let's look at the poster. Oh, what's the message? Oh, okay, I get it, no? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. That's the end of the speaking test.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So basically what I want you to do now is assess this lady. We've only got 4 people, so we'll just do pairs. And I just want you to tell the other person what score you would give her and why. Bear in mind, just to give you a sort of a ballpoint figure, that sort of 5.5 is kind of a middle score, right? So if you get below 5.5, you're below average, and if you're above 5.5, you're above average. Okay. So Jane, yeah, since we only have 4 people, just two groups of 2, and probably just 3 or 4 minutes. So let's say, yes, 3 or 4 minutes. Is that okay, Jane? Hey, Jane. Welcome back, examiners. Please score her. I'm only allowing, I mean, maybe you did a 0.5 score, but just go for a whole number for now. And just wait for one more vote. Okay, great. So, again, I'm not here to tell you this is wrong and this is right. I'm genuinely interested. So, usually what I do is I ask the person who gave the lowest score and what was wrong, and then I ask the person who gave the highest score what was right, what was good. So who gave the 7? Who gave the 7? That was Lydia. Okay, so Lydia, could you tell us what she didn't do well?
That was exactly what Chris and I were chatting about. For me, I a little bit go from maybe I'm stricter being non-native. So I look at maybe a little bit differently, maybe. I don't know, for example, the fluency was pretty good. Everything was really good, but for me, it was a little bit simple conversation. I think she should go a little bit, I don't know, with maybe higher vocabulary, more difficult grammar. But yeah, pronunciation was great. You can still catch certain accent and stuff. So for those reasons, it was maybe between 7 and 7.5. But yeah, I went with 7.
Okay, so you think she could have just done more? She could have
a little bit more, yes, for that act.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Examiner and Lydia. How about you, Richard? On the positive side, what did she do well?
Yeah, I thought her fluency and coherence was great. She spoke very casually, like a kind of young person. She connected her speech very well. There was a bit of up talk as well, which I sort of detected. So, sort of going up at the end of sentences, which is a sign that somebody's kind of really absorbed the language of their peer group. I thought her lexical resources were excellent. She talked about bling. She talked about the norm. She talked about the tendency to do something, be exposed to something. There were a few grammatical errors, and if she did make them, she went and repaired them.
So why not a 9 then, just out of interest?
Pronunciation, I thought, was a bit slightly weaker. I mean, it wasn't bad, but there was things like sports and spots. Her TH sound was not so accurate, so there's tinner and thinner. She materialistic 2 or 3 times, and it took me a while to be able to understand what she'd said. There's some slight vowel sounds as well, like foxes instead of foxes, that kind of
dangerous one.
Yeah, so I just thought on pronunciation she was a bit weaker. Well, there wasn't very much wrong, I didn't think. And an 8 seemed a little bit harsh, but in a way.
There's 8.5 as well, but I know you can't do that on this one. But yeah, maybe you would be 8.5 then. If you were 8 on pronunciation and 9 on the others, then it would be an 8.5. So, yeah, I'm glad you guys weren't putting 4s and 5s. That's a relief. And I don't want to say, because I'm going to, even though I'm an IELTS examiner, I'm going to say now that we judge over the whole test. So that was only one part of the test. If I was just watching that part of the test, it would be an 8.5 or a 9. She's really, really, really good. And you have to really nitpick to find things wrong with her. As for pronunciation, again, this depends on the test, but with IELTS, it's just about whether the accent impacts on comprehension. And maybe the word materialistic, maybe that one. But the rest, I even if she's slightly mispronounced it, I have no problem whatsoever understanding her. So
yeah, you knew from context, right? So that's just nitpicking, really.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When it is a high level one, that's what you do, right? You're desperately looking for a mistake. Cool. Well done. Thank you very much. Like I said, I'm encouraged that you all gave her a good score. Let's move on. Although I think we might change the next activity just because of time. I'll tell you about what would have been the next activity, and you'll be relieved that we're not doing it, probably. Next activity, I was going to do a writing activity based on ACEN. So I'll just go through it with you, but perhaps we won't do it because I don't think we have enough time. What I was going to have you do, and you could do as students, is you do an ACEN writing test, which is a fairly short test, 120 to 150 words. And usually you'd have 20 minutes to write it. I was going to do it in 10 minutes, but we only have 18 minutes left of this presentation, so I don't think it's realistic. The goal here, again, would be to examine, but this time it would be to self-examine. So I was going to ask you to self-score based on the criteria given by ACEN. So ACEN does these 4: content, cohesion, vocabulary, and grammar. So the idea is that you would, with your students, perhaps you'd spend 20 minutes and they would do a practice ACEN test, and then they would score themselves and they would justify their score to their partners, group members. Of course, this could be done via, what you could follow it up with is that their test is then read by a peer, by another student, and that they score them. And even perhaps they give in the task and then you score it. And this creates an element of standardization. We're not going to do it now because of time, but that's another possible activity. Instead, let's do another speaking one, just because they could be quite fun. I've got a second video. And now that you're all experienced on what a very high level student is, let's have a different one. So same criteria, 1 to 9. 1 is kills the examiner, and 9 is very similar to the last lady, right? And let's watch this video and assess in the same way, because this should take just a few minutes. I'll stop the video early if I need to. Same as before: fluency, coherence, vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. Here we go.
Tina, now I'm going to give you a topic, and I'd like you to talk about it for 1 to 2 minutes. Before you talk, you will have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say.
Okay.
You can make some notes if you wish. Do you understand?
Yep.
Here's some paper and pencil for making notes. And here's your topic. I'd like you to describe an interest or hobby that you enjoy. All right, Tina?
Yep.
Remember, you have 1 to 2 minutes for this, so don't worry if I stop you.
Okay.
I'll tell you when the time is up.
Okay.
Can you start speaking now, please?
Okay. My interest or hobby that I enjoy is shopping and picnics to spend time with my family or friends. Or especially, I want to do volunteers for shopping. I think when I feel stressed out, I can shopping. I can relax with to buy a new clothes for me in the special days. And in picnic, I think picnic and travel. I think I can widen my knowledge as well as I can make more friends from many countries, and especially if I travel with my friend or my family, I can spend time to understand them. For me, the more important is to volunteer because I love. Actually, I love the people, so I want to spend time to help them to overcome or try to get over the problem. So I often, before when I live in Vietnam, I often go to the church and or some association, and I often ask my friend to contribute and give a hand to help the poor people or the old people, because I think the old people also it look like my grandparents, so I want to take care for them. Yeah. And in the future, I also want to build the big house, and I will maybe I will take the good care for our family or the children, and I think they will have a better life. I hope that.
Thank you. Do you think you'll always be interested in this?
Yeah, I think that when I engage with to volunteer, especially I feel straight out is disappear, and I enjoy with it. Yeah.
Okay. Same activity, just in the part. Do we have one more person now? Do we have one more person? Oh, no,
we don't.
Oh, sorry.
Same number.
Again, I think Nick came and then left. I think people keep coming during the videos and then getting put off. So let's just do the same partners, same again. This time a little bit shorter, Jane. Let's just say 2 minutes because they're now experts, so they have no problem with this. What do you reckon, Jane?
Sorry, I think they might.
If we, I can do that, can't I? So what I do is, sorry, these were the results last time. Stop sharing. No, I want to relaunch poll. There we go. Okay, so same question, but with a different person. Okay, cool. And you all agree. That's interesting. So 4. So I'll just ask the other 2 people. So Brianna, could you tell me things that were not good, the problems? Oh, sorry, you muted, Brianna.
Sorry. Yeah, the biggest one for me was her grammar. I noticed she had a lot of trouble with word tenses, and she omitted a lot of particles, things like that. So it wasn't, not just, of course, it wasn't correct, but it kind of made the sentences very choppy to me.
Yeah, there were definitely mistakes.
Yeah, I think she obviously understood the question. I think her biggest part was just explaining everything.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's all true. Chris, what about any good things that she did?
I thought her fluency was okay. I'd give her a 5 or 6 for fluency, 5 for vocabulary and grammar, and pronunciation 2. I thought her pronunciation was quite difficult to understand. Yeah, 4.5 in overall. I mean, in the word trebo, eventually I realized it was travel. So I thought, I mean, the intonation wasn't quite right there on some of the words. So
yeah, it was difficult to follow her on several occasions. That's true. Pronunciation was definitely her biggest weakness. Just again, you guys don't know because you're not IELTS examiners, but it never happens that there's a big gap between each category. I don't, even if it's justified, it's always like 5.566 or 7.776. They never have a 4.872 person. Never happens. Yeah, so perhaps a little bit harsh. Again, you guys are not IELTS examiners. 4 is pretty low. It's pretty low. She's just too good for 4. I would give her about 5.5, maybe 6, but probably 5.5. She's very fluent. Honestly, this is part 2 as well, where they have to try and speak as fluently as much as they can, and she does speak fluently. But anyway, I'm not trying to say your answers are wrong or right. Again, we only saw a glimpse of her test. She does another 10 minutes, so we don't know how she does in that time. I'm trying to emphasize the benefits of this type of activity of assessing in this way. So let me just go through the last parts of my talk. So one moment. So we're skipping over the writing. Okay, other tips and activities. So for speaking activities, my recommendation is to provide a mix of non-assessed, assessed holistically, and assessed by a specific criteria speaking activities. We do, where I work, we do a lot of discussion activities. That's great, but I think it's good to mix it up with these type of activities too. Yeah, and expose them to speaking activities which might be found in tests. For writing activities, again, maybe you already do this, but sometimes have timed writing activities to replicate a test. How much, simple things like how much can they write in 20 minutes, 40 minutes? For listening activities, sometimes just let them listen once or twice, see how well they do with minimal exposures to a listening. That's also more like real life, right? Try to include a wide range of recording types if possible, formal, informal, etc. And for reading activities, similar to the writing, try to include some timed reading activities rather than just comprehensive where they do as much as they can for homework. Many teachers already do this, but try to improve speed through things like skimming and scanning, not scamming. And again, a wide range of readings, including formal academic ones. And in general, you can always try test, teach, test. So you could start by testing them. I know some writing courses, this is common to start with a pre-test. And this type of thing can actually work really, really well. So it also shows students their improvement really nicely. If you show them how they were in the first test and then the latter test, it's a very effective way of showing improvement. So I'm rushing through this a little bit. The drawbacks. So the drawbacks of doing these type of activities, students can compare themselves to others. So because they're giving exact scores, it can demotivate students who get low scores, right? This is a big problem. Second, it could be a bit too controlled. Tests by their very nature are controlled, but we want to, provoke discussion. We want them to feel confident to go on tangents and things like this, but tests are very controlled. There's a strong argument that first we need fluency before we go towards accuracy. That we should just be encouraging them to speak or to write as much as possible before we start making them examine themselves. Not all students need tests, right? Not all students will need these tests. So why should those students participate in these activities? And finally, as I've said, teachers are already using a lot of these techniques. Some of the ones I'll have mentioned today, you'll already be doing. You'll already be doing peer assessment, self-assessment. The way I'm suggesting is just slightly more standardized. And I just want to make it completely clear that I'm not suggesting these should dominate courses, just be included in courses. perhaps to prepare students for conversation tests or to prepare students for writing essays and things like this. You could include a class which has a timed essay. You could include a class where they score each other on whatever scale you decide. And that it can be kind of fun. If you're afraid of students comparing themselves to other students too much, like today, use a video, use a third person. That way they're examiners and nobody gets upset or hurt, but they do get a better idea of how to assess level. Good, those are my references. Thank you very much. I've very cleverly left almost no time for questions. So thank you very much for joining me. Yeah, you stuck with me, so thank you very much. If you have a question, that might be okay, but yes. No?